Folks, this is when we really get to talk nuts and bolts football, getting you set for August camp. We got Isaiah Hull on the line from Wolverines Wire. Catch him right there. And also his podcast, Locked On Wolverines. We've knocked out the Michigan offense. Let's check out the defense. Mike Morris, Mozzie Smith, absent from up front. They move on to the NFL. Isaiah, set us up on that Michigan front line defensively.
Well, this is one of those weird years for Michigan in the sense of normally we've kind of gone into any given season saying that you knew the edge rushing talent was there and you questioned the interior. This year it's kind of the opposite. You've got lots of bodies on the interior, certainly a four-man rotation. Chris Jenkins, who 310 pounds, he played 285 last year. If you looked at this guy in person, you look at him and you think there's no way you weigh more than like 250, but it's because he's that lean and he's 310 pounds, called the mutant. And it makes sense why. He's thought of as being a potential first round NFL draft pick. So he takes over, not for Mozzie Smith, because he played next to Mozzie Smith last year, but he takes over that kind of, what is the word? Just kind of the leadership role there. That's not what I'm trying to say, but nonetheless. And next to him, you've got Mason Graham, who after his first year, you don't normally expect a defensive tackle in year one to be as good as he was, right? You don't expect to say, hey, freshman, we need a stop on 4th and 1, go out there and do it, especially if you're not a 5-star. And yet he went out and did it multiple times. I mean, just really, really talented. Kenneth Grant, who is an absolute behemoth. That's the duo that Jim Harbaugh called the gift from the football gods last year at the Big Ten Media Days. And then you add Rayshawn Benny, who really finally started coming up strong late in the year, finishing out his second year with the program. So that's a really good four-man rotation. But the questions, I think, exist on the edge. Jalen Harrell returns, kind of more of a Sam linebacker type of edge rusher. Certainly has the height and the size, but he kind of plays that more leaner role. And Braden McGregor is the one that's expected to kind of step up into that Aiden Hutchinson style role. I said a long time ago when he committed that whatever Aiden Hutchinson became, Braden McGregor would be the better version of it. Hasn't really turned out that way yet, and also didn't expect Aiden Hutchinson to be quite as good as he ended up being. But he has the same physical tools, but it's still just kind of been working back from an ACL injury he had at his senior year of high school. So it's a little bit mental at this point, and they're really going to be counting on him. Certainly there's other guys that you can expect to be involved. It's just kind of a question of how much. Josiah Stewart, the transfer from Coastal Carolina, he's gotten a lot of hype. He was considered to be one of the best transfers out there, a little undersized, but really showed out in the spring game. I'm curious to see how much he's able to replicate that in games. But I mean, he was the guy that had 12.5 sacks, I believe it was 2 years ago for Coastal Carolina. Definitely a different competition playing in the Big Ten compared to playing there in whatever division it is that Coastal Carolina plays in, whatever conference that is. I couldn't even tell you offhand.
Sunbelt.
Sure. Sunbelt, that's what it is. I'm sure that's a real conference
for the outside the Power 5 Big Ten stuff. Yeah.
I think you're making up that conference, but I'll agree with you on it. Nonetheless, they've got him. They've got some other guys like Derek Moore. He was a true freshman last year. He was a 4-star, highly thought of. Finally, he's just kind of starting to get his feet wet. Felt like was like he was swimming a little bit, trying to kind of get everything in and figuring out the college game. Now he feels like he's ready to go. And there's some other guys that have just been kind of waiting in the wings. TJ Guy, former 3-star out of New England. Keyshawn Bennett, a former 4-star out of New England, who definitely looks the part of being a physical freak. So I guess the question is who of those, how do those guys really get involved? And I think they have a couple of freshmen who could really also play a part. Defensive tackle Trey Pierce is the one that I've really got my eye on as far as that's concerned. So interior, you feel really good about it. Exterior, it'll be an interesting thing to see. Michigan is long. Mike Morris was the first starting edge rusher in the Jim Harbaugh era that did not get drafted in the 3rd round or higher. So he broke that precedent. So it'll be interesting to see if one of these guys that they have now can get back into that show that was an aberration, because Michigan's actually long had, even when it doesn't seem like it, has had really solid edge rushers for the last 8 years.
Folks, we love to keep up with the personnel, and these are the kind of breakdowns that I enjoy. We got Isaiah Hull here from Wolverines Wire. Also, check out his podcast, Locked On Wolverines. And we're setting you up for fall camp. We're running through the defense. At linebacker, Michigan brings in a guy with Ernest Hausman, who was one of the better freshmen on either side of the ball in all the Big Ten. He steps in and may have to play a backup role. He's obviously going to be on the field plenty, but with Junior Colson and Michael Barrett there, Michigan's certainly in a great shape at linebacker.
Yeah, it's not something that we've said for a while. And then, you know, if they feel like the offense can spare Khalil Mullings, I'm sure we'll see him back at linebacker as well. I mean, he played both ways in the Big Ten championship game, scored a touchdown, and then went back out and made a tackle on the very next play on defense. So I can only imagine how tiring that is as a 41-year-old man. But yeah, it's Junior Colson. Last year was his first year as a starter, and at times it felt like he was, as Don Brown used to say, a little bit in the soup, right? And I still think that he played extremely well. He had some injuries corrected that had been bothering him and nagging him all season long. He had those corrected this offseason, so he's good to go. Did not know that he was suffering from injuries. I know everyone has injuries in college football. It sounds like Michigan had a lot of guys, though, between him and Donovan Edwards, that were playing with some pretty severe injuries all season long, but still went out there and did it. But Junior Colson, I mean, he just looks, having seen him multiple times over the summer, I mean, carved like a Greek god, essentially. You know, he looks like a statue. It'll be interesting to see how just the shape he's in pays dividends for his capability. He was already a fast, instinctual guy, and to be able to really just get the body even more in shape, it will be interesting to see. And then Mike Barrett was really underrated, but I think in a large part is because we waited basically his entire career for him to have the type of year he had last year. Granted, he's been bounced around a bit. He was a quarterback in high school, Valdosta Lowndes down in Georgia, and finally kind of figured out what he needed to do. He finally started getting inserted in 2021 at linebacker after being Don Brown's Viper in 2020. Got inserted late in 2021 when Michigan was having struggles with teams going tempo on them and not being able to keep up. It really hurt them against Michigan State. And after that, Mike Barrett started playing a part, but didn't really kind of have a grasp on what he needed to do. And then last year, he was out there making all those big plays, decided to come back for a 6th year. And we'll see if he's able to build on it, because he went from being a guy that was a borderline liability to being pretty good to now a guy that you want to see out there all the time. So, and then there's Jimmy Rolder, who was a 4-star guy, kind of really seemed like he was born and bred to play at Wisconsin. He's, you know, from Chicago, so you could say Notre Dame or Wisconsin. Wisconsin, with its issues with its former coaching staff, he went to do an official visit there. I don't know if it was an unofficial or official. And Paul Chryst didn't even know he was there. So that really hurt Wisconsin, because he kind of has that type of look of, you would look at like the Nick Herbigs of the world and say, yeah, that should be his heir apparent. Yet he's wearing a winged helmet. So he got to play quite a bit last year. So it'll be interesting to see how much more he's able to play this year, especially when you combine them with Ernest Hausman, who you mentioned at the top. And I think you're going to see him early and often. We saw him in the spring game, and he was flying all over the field, the exact type of linebacker that Michigan needed. The one thing that Michigan has not really been able to do in the Jim Harbaugh era is really have elite linebacking play across the board. Every now and again, they have one really good linebacker like Devin Bush, who has a couple pretty good linebackers alongside him. You even look back to early Jim Harbaugh, they had some really, you know, pretty good linebackers, Mike McCray, Joe Bolden, Desmond Morgan. They were good, but you wouldn't look at them and say like those guys were elite. You know, Jabril Peppers played that quasi linebacker position, and he was maybe the more elite one, but it was usually the force of one guy surrounded by a couple guys that were capable. Now they have multiple guys that are maybe not full on elite, but much higher ceilings than all of the guys that we're talking about from the past. So that's what I'm interested to see, because finally, usually we're going into fall camp and I'm sitting there writing out like what position groups are in good shape, which ones maybe need a little bit of work. And linebackers been almost every year the very last position on my list. This year, it's at least in the middle, and that's a huge improvement.
Yeah, it seems like much of what you say about the offensive line, that if Michigan, for whatever reason, would have to go to the completely second unit, that there wouldn't be as near of a drop-off as you might expect, that the linebackers position is not only better across the board, but it's got more volume of talent, more players that can play the position at a decent level, Big Ten level, than what they've had at times in the past. Folks, if you like the video, please like the video and share it out on social media. Subscribe here at the Voice of College Football. Check out Isaiah's work. Locked On Wolverines is the podcast. Wolverines Wire, the destination for Isaiah's writing right there. Isaiah, I would say that for me at least, and this opinion I would think would be shared by others, that there's not a guy that I'm looking forward to seeing from start to finish now for a full season being the guy at cornerback than Will Johnson.
He was considered to be one of the best cornerbacks, not only in the conference, but in the country as a true freshman. And he really only played the last 5-6 games as far as being really out there. It was only the Rutgers game that he got inserted as a starter, and that was due to Jamon Green having concussion symptoms from the Michigan State tunnel incident. So finally, true freshman, former 5-star legacy guy, gets thrown into the mix. And what does he do? He gets an interception right out of the gates. Had 2 really big interceptions in the Big Ten championship game. And was one of those, he was so good, just like how I mentioned on the offensive line when we talked about the offense, about Trente Jones getting injured and then Carson Barnhart taking over his position. And then once Jones was healthy, Barnhart couldn't relinquish the role because he was that good. Kind of the same thing for Jamon Green. He gets injured. Will Johnson goes out there, and then they're kind of like, well, we got to keep Will on the field because he's just that good. So he's got everything you want: speed, length, a knack for an instinct for the ball. Clearly much smarter than you would think when you look at how he's anticipated. You look at those Purdue interceptions, the anticipation, recognition, being able to read the offense and know exactly where to be, where to go. He's got the hands. He's got everything. You've seen when you look around like PFF and all these other outlets that do these previews. Will Johnson is thought of as being one of the best cornerbacks in the country. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes in year 2, because now he knows how to do the college football thing. Because at the beginning of last year, it was very clear he didn't. I mean, game 1 against Western Michigan, was it Western Michigan? I think so. It's been a long year, but they were literally
games kind of run together for Michigan too.
They do.
It seems like it's 50-3 for about 3 weeks straight, just nonstop.
That's exactly what it is. So it's whoever it was that they played, they were clearly targeting him, and he gave up a touchdown, and it's kind of like, oh, that he's clearly not ready for this. And then by the end of the season, he was. So it'll be interesting to see how he does. Now, the big question, obviously, and this is the biggest question for Michigan, is who do they pair opposite? There are a couple options. Their options have gotten deeper since spring ball, because they brought in Josh Wallace, the former team captain from UMass, thought to be he was actually one of the few people at UMass that was really good. I spoke to someone close to him, and he was saying, like, yeah, this just, they don't want to let him go, but they kind of, it's one of those big fish, small pond situations. He needs to be able to go out there and kind of put himself out, give himself a little bit of a limelight, show a little bit what he can do. And he is more than capable of being that starter. They had toyed with the idea of slot receiver, nickelback, Mike Sainristil, who had the unbelievable play against Cade Stover in the Ohio State game. he has the capability of being that outside corner instead of a slot guy, but they would prefer to keep him in the nickel position. And then there's Amarian Walker and Jade McBurrows. What do you do with those guys? They moved Amarian over from wide receiver. Jim Harbaugh says he's a unicorn. He's got size, and they think he's the fastest guy on the team, running like a 4.2 type, even though he's a 6'4" player. Did not look good in the spring game at all. So clearly some work to be done there. Jaden McBurrows was a 3-star from St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the premier high schools in Florida. He's had injury issues his entire Michigan career, unfortunately. 2021 saw the field early, but then was kind of precluded and in street clothes for much of the year. And then didn't really see the field last year due to injuries, kind of finally gets back in uniform, and again was in the Michigan State tunnel incident and was out of uniform again. So been a kind of a tenuous career for Jaden McBurrows, but a guy that despite being a 3-star had LSU and Alabama offers. So I'm excited to see what a cornerback that has offers from the types of schools that if you have an offer from usually means you can play really good football. We don't know exactly what Jaden McBurrows can do because we really haven't seen it. But there's indications that you would look at and say he could probably do pretty good. So they have options, but I think it's a good thing, kind of like last year, where the non-conference is completely not scary. They can kind of ease into things. I mean, even maybe the early Big Ten schedule with, Rutgers, Nebraska, very much a reloading Minnesota. That should be really amenable for Michigan to be able to kind of figure out what it needs to do so that when you get to that back end against some of the more pass-happy teams on the schedule, the last 3 games of the regular season are Penn State, Maryland, and Ohio State. Certainly, they're not going to see teams pass like those 3 probably. So whoever is going to be opposite Will Johnson will have that opportunity to get honed in for 9 weeks.
Like, share, subscribe if you enjoy what we do here at the Voice of College Football. Check out Isaiah's work there. Locked On Wolverines, that's the podcast. And then you got Wolverines Wire, of course, as well. Rod Moore back at safety. Makari Page is back.
The good news is they do have Rod Moore and Makari Page, who PFF just called the best, the top 2 safeties that are returning in the Big Ten. Rod Moore is a guy that Jim Harbaugh said that could be, if he would have, because he came to school at 17, said if he would have, been in the typical age of coming at 18 and would have stayed another year in high school, if he didn't graduate early, he would have been seen as a 5-star recruit instead of a 3-star. Coming out of the state of Ohio, so that's a big coup for me. And even if Ohio State didn't have an offer, just to be able to get a guy that's widely regarded as one of the best safeties. I believe PFF had him as the 5th best safety returning nationally. To have that guy being a 3-star from Ohio, have that chip on his shoulder, have the confidence he has. He's studious too. That's the thing. He's known as being the guy that watches the most film out of anybody. And when you started to say there's no one I wanted to see more from start to finish in a year, I thought you were going to say Rod Moore because he has that type of capability. So I'm excited to see. And then Makari Page is just, I think he's just quietly very good. Finally got his opportunity. He's bided his time. 4-star out of West Bloomfield, entering his senior year here. Didn't really make waves until last year, and then suddenly it's like you see his knack, his capability of really being able to read what the offense is doing and put himself in the right spot. They're a formidable duo. I do wonder with RJ Moten's transfer if part of that was precluded by the emergence of Zeke Berry and Keon Sabb. Sabb being a former 5-star at one point, previously committed to Clemson, and then flipped to Michigan, I believe the day before signing day, had been dropped down to a 4-star. Zeke Berry being a 4-star out of California, who's kind of the jack-of-all-trades type of safety. So I'm curious to see how those guys get implemented. And Caden Colasar, people don't really talk about him because they think of him as more of a special teams guy. He missed most of last year after being injured in the Iowa game in week 5. But he's another guy at safety who could also play a role. We've seen him get inserted here and there on defense, a little bit more undersized, but they have bodies at safety. I think that's the thing that you can go through, whether it's defense, offense, just really up and down the depth chart. This is the first time I think with just a handful of exceptions, wide receiver, maybe cornerback. But when you look at the offensive line, you look at the defensive tackle, you look at the linebackers, you look at the safeties, you look at tight end, and you're sitting there and looking, and you're saying, if the starters at that position go down, there's probably not going to be much of a drop off between them and that next group. Safety is another one of those positions. So I'm really excited to see how they end up rotating those guys.
Isaiah, it's easy to forget the non-football players, but when it's Jake Moody, who was the first kicker, of course, taken off the board at the NFL draft, and also Brad Robbins, outstanding in his own right, who's in camp with the Cincinnati Bengals. This is obviously an important decision, and somebody's going to need to step up at each one of these spots.
Well, I think that when you had a kicker as good as Jake Moody, you just shut down the position. You call it the Jake Moody, memorial position, and just say we're just not going to kick. Unfortunately, it's he was too good at it, and we're done. But apparently, Michigan's not taking my ideas for what they should do, and they went out and got even though they had Tommy Doman, who was a former 5-star, according to I believe Cole's Kicking. He's both a kicker and a punter. They didn't want to put it all in him, and as he enters his 3rd year, so he'll probably be the main punter. He'll certainly be in the competition for kicker as well. But they went out and got kickers out of the transfer portal. The main one being a graduate, so you expect him to be the guy. That's James Turner out of Louisville. He was pretty good at Louisville. Certainly don't know a heck of a lot about him. Louisville wasn't exactly known for their unbelievable capabilities in special teams. But he was solid. I don't remember his percentages offhand, but he was a solid pickup. And then I believe his name was Hudson Hollenbeck out of was it Mississippi State? I think it was Mississippi State. It was either Mississippi State or Ole Miss. He was coming off of his freshman year, so they have those guys. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. Certainly, they've got the talent in Tommy Doman. He's been around. He is a big guy at 6'5". Definitely looks more like the one that you would expect to be the punter. He was considered to be a better punter in terms of the rankings anyhow. And then you've got a couple different kickers you can work through. I think the other good news is that William Wagner, who got hurt on the very same play as Caden Colasar against Iowa, also I believe an ACL tear, he should be back. And he was one of the best holders in the country. For those who weirdly pay attention to those types of things like I do. But he actually had a pretty decent backup in Greg Tarr as well, who was thought very highly, again, from, I believe, Cole's Kicking. So that whole special teams battery, it has capability. However, that's one of the big question marks, right? Like I'm not going to sit there and say, yeah, it's going to be good. It has, on paper, it looks pretty good based off of recruiting rankings and such. But it's going to be a lot harder, I think, than people realize to replace a guy that was able to go out there and kick a 60-yard field goal in a college football playoff game. So Michigan might not be able to rely on it quite as heavily. So hopefully for the Wolverines, they'll be able to get that offense rolling where they won't have to.
Well, like Moton, as soon as you said Louisville, when I asked about the kicker, and you mentioned that school, I thought, well, I produced a video on this guy too. So yeah, 20 of 22, that's a good indicator. So he improved considerably from his previous season at 13 for 20, only missed 2 kicks, hit on 91%. So that if he can continue that, and of course it's different when you're kicking from that distance at a college football playoff game or with the game on the line against Illinois on the final play of the game. Those are going to be the ones that he's going to have to hit to keep in line with Michigan's goals, certainly. Isaiah Holes here, Wolverines Wire. Also, the podcast is Locked On Wolverines. Isaiah, you don't realize how much you've helped us out here. We want to get everyone set for Michigan fall camp and run down all the personnel. So thank you so much for stopping by.
No problem. This is all subterfuge, by the way. The actual starter is going to be at quarterback, going to be Davis Warren. I just completely, just want to get everyone kind of confused so that we can have a lot more fun come college football season. Kidding, of course. That's always
we will have you back if Davis Warren becomes the starter in week 1. We will certainly have a scoop, and you will need to come on immediately for late breaking news. Yes. Thanks,
Let's
Isaiah.
hope that doesn't happen. No problem.